Melania Trump is marking her first year back as US First Lady with the global release of a documentary she produced. The film, simply titled Melania, follows the 20 days leading up to Donald Trump's return to the White House for his second term. It's opening in more than 1,500 theaters in the United States and abroad, but reception has been lukewarm.
It was supposed to boost her image. Now it's a global humiliation. Australia just savaged Melania Trump's new documentary, and sources say the reaction pushed Donald Trump into absolute fury. Screaming matches, threats of retaliation, total meltdown. Meanwhile, Melania Trump is facing brutal headlines and an unforgiving spotlight. Why did critics go nuclear, and how far will Trump go to strike back? This backlash just crossed a dangerous line.
How was the film actually received?
Well, for the amount of money that was spent, the film hasn't done so well up till now. It doesn't have a lot of competing films in this weekend, but so far the turnout has been rather minimal. I mean, even in Melania Trump's own country, Slovenia, reports say around 40 people were seen in the theaters.
The release of Melania Trump's documentary on Amazon Prime has taken an unexpected turn in Australia, where the film's theatrical performance has become one of the most talked about entertainment stories of the year. What started as a standard limited cinema release has evolved into a cultural phenomenon, though not in the way anyone involved with the production likely anticipated. According to reports from multiple Australian media outlets, the documentary's opening weekend box office figures were remarkably low. Village Cinemas, one of Australia's major theatre chains, reportedly sold just 3 tickets across all of its locations. Hoyts, another prominent cinema group, recorded 5 ticket sales. Event Cinemas, which operates numerous screens across the country, apparently registered 0 sales for opening weekend sessions. Independent theatres collectively managed 2 tickets, with one report suggesting that one of those purchases was made by a staff member who subsequently fell asleep during the screening. The total number of tickets sold nationwide came to approximately 10, in a country with a population exceeding 27 million people. To put this figure into perspective, several media outlets began making comparisons to other events and screenings. The Perth Zoo's exhibit, featuring a newborn pygmy hippo, reportedly attracted more visitors on an ordinary Tuesday in July than the documentary did in cinemas across an entire weekend. Perhaps most striking was the comparison to a screening of the 1998 Spice girls' film at a cinema in Alice Springs, which allegedly sold 11 tickets just weeks earlier. These figures quickly caught the attention of Australian media, and by Friday evening, the story had become a major talking point on television. The Project, a popular news and current affairs program on Channel 10, dedicated a substantial segment to the documentary's performance. The segment, which ran for approximately 10 minutes, has since been viewed millions of times online. Host Waleed Ali delivered the opening remarks with characteristic dry humour, announcing that the film had grossed $117 Australian nationwide. The comparison was made that this amount would be sufficient to purchase a single schooner of beer at a Sydney pub, with enough change remaining for public transport. Comedian Peter Helliar appeared on the programme holding what he claimed was one of the actual tickets sold, joking about being singled out as one of the few Australians who had attended a screening. The segment resonated widely with Australian audiences, tapping into the country's well-known cultural tendency toward irreverent humour and its willingness to mock prominent public figures, regardless of their status. By Saturday morning, the story had gained even more traction. Breakfast television programmes picked up the narrative, with hosts across multiple networks discussing the box office performance. Sunrise, a leading morning show, reportedly sent a camera crew to a 7:15 evening session at Bondi Junction in Sydney. According to their coverage, the crew filmed from the back of the theatre and found only a single patron in attendance. The individual was described as wearing a MAGA hat and sitting alone in the cinema. The production team apparently obtained footage showing the largely empty theatre, which they broadcast the following morning. Staff members from various cinema locations began sharing their experiences on social media, with some describing quiet sessions where they had prepared screening rooms for audiences that never materialized. One concessions worker was quoted describing an evening session where a single patron had purchased a premium gold-class seat and arrived early, only to sit alone throughout the entire film. What happened next was perhaps unprecedented in Australian cinema history. Several theatre chains began updating their attendance figures on their websites in real time, similar to how live sporting events display scores. Audiences could refresh cinema websites and see the exact number of tickets sold for upcoming sessions. Multiple sessions across different cities showed zero attendance, and this became a source of entertainment in itself for many Australians who began monitoring the numbers throughout the weekend. Social media activity around the documentary's performance reached significant levels, with the topic trending across Australian Twitter feeds for much of the weekend. Conversation took on the character of a sporting event, with users checking in regularly to see if attendance numbers had changed. Some cinemas leaned into the phenomenon, with one Brisbane location reportedly displaying a notice advertising the screening while noting its zero attendance, framing it as an ideal option for those seeking solitude. The online response generated thousands of posts, tweets, and memes. Images of empty IMAX theatres circulated with captions suggesting what it might be like to be the sole attendee at an Australian screening. Satirical advertisements appeared, imagining what cinema chains might say to promote the film given its performance. Comparisons were drawn between the documentary and other activities, with many suggesting that staring at a blank wall would provide equivalent entertainment value. Australian organisations not typically involved in film commentary joined the conversation. The Melbourne Zoo's official social media account posted a comparison between visitor numbers for their meerkat exhibit and the documentary's attendance figures, noting that the meerkats had attracted larger crowds despite engaging in minimal activity. The post drew tens of thousands of interactions and was widely shared as an example of Australian institutional humour. One of the most circulated pieces of content was a fabricated food delivery listing, formatted to look like an order from a popular delivery service. The mock listing showed an order being sent to a specific cinema screen during a scheduled session, with delivery instructions requesting that the food be left outside because there was nobody inside to receive it. This particular piece of content was shared extensively and became emblematic of the weekend's online activity. The phenomenon demonstrated several aspects of contemporary Australian media culture. The willingness of mainstream television programs to devote significant airtime to what was essentially a box office failure showed how the story had transcended simple entertainment news to become a broader cultural talking point. The involvement of official organisational accounts, from zoos to other public institutions, illustrated how the story had permeated various sectors of Australian public life. Throughout this period, the tone of the coverage and social media commentary remained largely consistent. Rather than focusing on the documentary's content or engaging with it as a serious film, the Australian response centred almost entirely on the attendance figures themselves and what they might signify. The numbers became the story, and the story became a form of national entertainment that united Australians across geographic and demographic boundaries in shared amusement. The digital response to the documentary's performance continued to escalate throughout the weekend. Among the most widely shared pieces of content was a fabricated delivery service listing that appeared to show a food order being sent to a specific cinema location during a scheduled screening. The mock listing included detailed delivery instructions requesting that items be left outside the screening room door, as there would presumably be no one inside to accept them. This particular piece of satirical content accumulated hundreds of thousands of shares and became one of the defining images of the weekend's online conversation. As the Australian media coverage intensified and spread across international news platforms, reports began emerging about reactions from the Trump family. According to sources cited by several news outlets, the former president was said to be monitoring the Australian coverage closely. Multiple reports suggested that he had watched segments from Australian television programs repeatedly over a period of several days. These sources, described as individuals close to the situation, claimed that Trump was particularly frustrated by the tone and content of the Australian media's approach to the story. Some reports went further, alleging specific incidents that could not be independently verified. Claims surfaced that Trump had attempted to contact Australian diplomatic representatives in the early morning hours, though the details of any such communication remained unconfirmed. Additional unverified reports suggested that there had been discussions about requesting Amazon to alter the film's distribution in Australia, though no official statements from either Amazon or representatives of the Trump family confirmed these claims. The Australian media appeared undeterred by any reported reactions, and coverage continued to expand through the weekend. By Sunday morning, the story had moved from television and digital platforms to print media. The Sydney Morning Herald, one of Australia's most established newspapers, devoted significant front-page coverage to the documentary's box office performance. The headline reportedly focused on the zero attendance figures that had characterized many screening sessions throughout the weekend. The newspaper's approach was notable for its visual presentation. According to those who saw the print edition, the publication included full-page imagery of empty cinema seats, showing row after row of vacant seating. The accompanying text was minimal, with the images themselves serving as the primary commentary on the situation. This stark visual approach was interpreted by many as a deliberate editorial choice, allowing the empty seats to speak for themselves about the Australian public's level of interest in the film. The story's reach extended beyond traditional media outlets. Qantas, Australia's flagship airline, became part of the conversation when reports emerged about their in-flight entertainment system. According to passengers and social media posts, the airline's entertainment interface had been updated to include new categorization for films. One category reportedly grouped together movies based on their runtime, in relation to flight duration. The documentary was allegedly included in this category, with accompanying text that made reference to the viewing experience feeling longer than the film's actual running time. Whether this was an official addition by Qantas or the work of individual employees remained unclear, but screenshots of the supposed interface circulated widely online. The weekend's events reached what many considered a climax on Sunday evening when the project returned to the story with another extended segment. This time, the program took a more experimental approach to their coverage. According to their broadcast and subsequent social media posts, the production team had purchased every ticket for a single screening session at a cinema in Perth. The total number of seats purchased was reported to be 180, representing full capacity for that particular screening room. The program documented their plan to fill the theatre with volunteers and then coordinate a mass exit at a predetermined point during the film. The segment was broadcast live, showing the 180 participants entering the cinema and taking their seats. At the 10-minute mark of the documentary, all participants stood simultaneously and filed out of the screening room in an organised fashion. The production team captured the entire sequence, showing the filled theatre becoming completely empty within minutes. The group reportedly proceeded directly to a nearby pub, where staff had been informed of the stunt in advance. According to the broadcast, the bar had prepared 180 shots, each accompanied by a small Slovenian flag as a reference to Melania Trump's country of origin. The participants toasted together before consuming the drinks, and this portion of the event was also filmed and included in the broadcast segment. The stunt generated substantial online attention, with the video clip being shared extensively across social media platforms. Host Waleed Ali provided closing commentary for the segment, noting that the exercise had demonstrated an unusual level of national unity around the shared decision to not watch the remainder of the documentary. The segment was interpreted by many viewers as both a comedic finale to the weekend's coverage and a statement about Australian public sentiment toward the film. Throughout all of this coverage, certain patterns emerged in how Australian media and the public engaged with the story. The focus remained consistently on the attendance figures rather than the documentary's actual content. Very few discussions centered on what the film contained, what arguments it made, or how it was structured as a piece of filmmaking. Instead, the box office numbers themselves became the primary subject of interest. This approach reflected broader tendencies within Australian media culture, particularly the tradition of irreverent humour directed at powerful figures and institutions. The coverage demonstrated how a story about a film's commercial failure could evolve into a participatory cultural event, with media organisations, businesses, and individual citizens all contributing to an ongoing narrative. The international reach of the story also became significant. The original segments from Australian television programmes accumulated millions of views from audiences outside Australia, suggesting that the story had resonated beyond its country of origin. International media outlets began covering the Australian response as a news story in itself, creating a secondary layer of coverage that focused not on the documentary, but on how it had been received in one particular market. By the end of the weekend, the documentary's Australian release had become a case study in how modern media ecosystems can transform a simple box office story into a multi-platform cultural phenomenon. The combination of traditional television coverage, newspaper reporting, social media engagement, and coordinated public stunts created a narrative that extended far beyond what would typically accompany a limited theatrical release. The aftermath of the weekend saw continued discussion about what the Australian response signified. Some interpreted it as a reflection of political sentiment, while others viewed it primarily as an example of Australian humour and cultural tendencies. Media analysts noted how the story demonstrated the power of social media to amplify and transform news narratives, turning what might have been a brief mention of poor box office performance into days of sustained coverage and public engagement. The incident also raised questions about the nature of documentary releases in the streaming era, where theatrical runs often serve promotional purposes rather than being the primary distribution method. The Australian response highlighted how audience indifference to a theatrical screening could become news in itself, particularly when the subject matter involved prominent public figures. As the week following the documentary's release began, the story gradually receded from the forefront of Australian media coverage, though it remained a reference point in discussions about film distribution, public relations, and the intersection of politics and entertainment. The phrase Melania Australia had become a shorthand for a spectacular commercial failure, likely to be referenced in future discussions of box office disappointments.